بعد الليالي والأيام من شوقي إليك والله ازاي هنا عليك كل شيء في البعد بشتاق لك يا غالي انت فين بنده
familiar faces and names.
والله وحشوني كتير عينيك معقول نسيت.
Welcome everybody. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Shila Desai. I'm the founder and owner of E.Y.H.O Tours. I'm based in Canada normally, but during the winter I escape to Kenya, which is where I am. And our small group tours focus on the textiles and material cultures of traditional societies all around the world. And during the pandemic, we have been bringing you virtual events to keep our travel community engaged. So today we'll launch a new type of event, and this is talks with published authors on books that are designed to whisk you away to the destinations that we all love. And today's talk is on the Tuareg people of Morocco. It's set in Morocco. And we do this all from the comfort of your home. You don't need any PCR tests and no passenger locator forms needed. So this is a real treat. So we shortly hope to transport you metaphysically to Morocco. And I'd like to add here that in mid-March, we also have a small group tour to Morocco in case metaphysically just does not do it for you. So do check out our tour, which is infused with textiles, culture, hands-on workshops. We have desert forays, of course, we're going to go into the desert, and we're going to do it all. So it's in mid-March, and as of now, it's a functioning group, functioning tour, and we'd love to welcome you. We just got a few more spots left on that. So now I have the pleasure of introducing Celia Jeffries. Celia, would you like to come on?
Yes, hello, Sheila. Thank you for inviting me.
Hello.
This is quite a pleasure.
Yes.
And I'm really excited for those who are leaving on your tour in March, because Morocco, as I hope people will see in my book, it's an amazing country, and the Sahara is magical.
Yes, it's one of these countries that I just want to pack up pack up and bring back everything. It's like a jewel box of a country. It's got everything in it. But before I hand over to Celia, I'd like to just tell you all about her accomplishments, and she's very modest about them, so that's why she kind of jumped in. Anyway, so Celia is a writer, teacher, and editor. She is the author of Blue Desert, and that is her first novel. It gathered multiple accolades, including finalist in the 2021 IPNE Book Awards, the NPR NEPM Choice for Summer Fiction Series, and Boston Globe Reader Recommended Books. Celia's writing has appeared in several literary journals, and she has received multiple grants for her work. Celia holds an MFA from Lesley University, and she has worked with writers at all levels and in all communities, including incarcerated, literary, and ESL programs. And so in case you haven't had a chance to read Blue Desert, I'm just going to give you a quick synopsis from the website. It's a story of a headstrong young British woman and her life among the Tuareg during the catastrophe of the World War I. The Tuareg's matrilineal culture, in which the men are veiled and the women hold property, is a world well suited to 18-year-old Alice, who discovers a life she could never live in corseted England. She returns home to a world completely alien to the one that she left behind in the Sahara. Her silence is finally broken 60 years later when she receives a telegram, and thus begins a journey of revelation as Alice lays bare her secrets. And I can tell you, I have read the book and it is utterly gripping. So why don't we have Celia now read for us, and then we can get started on some questions. Celia, carry on, take it away.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Sheila. Sheila said this is a book that takes place when Alice George, a young British woman, goes to Morocco in 1910 and then subsequently finds herself living with the Tuareg tribe in the Sahara for 5 years. So this is the opening is London, June 6, 1970. I wish for once the post would land upright in the box. Martin bends over to retrieve the day's missives. He's an exact man, neat to a fault. His pens and pencils line up on his desk, and papers are always sorted and piled like an oversized millefeuille. Anything for me, Alice calls. Everything for you, my love, Martin says. I don't want everything, she laughs. She may keep the bills. He smiles and walks over to hand her a heavy cream envelope. Oh, Lord, spare us, she whispers, an invitation to the Hobsons. Martin shakes his head. June is fast upon us, he says. Garden party, no doubt. Everyone is competing with Buckingham Palace. Alice begins to rip the edge of the envelope. She sees Martin purse his lips and tosses him a wide smile, then moves nimbly over to his desk and picks up his letter knife. She slips the ivory-handled spear under the flap of the envelope. She doesn't have to look up to know that his shoulders, which had seized a bit when she began to tear at the envelope, have now relaxed as she makes a clean slice through the vellum and pulls out the printed invitation. Indeed, she says in her most impressive House of Commons voice, the Harris Hobsons request the honor of our presence in the patch of lawn they have stuffed with roses and vicious dahlias. Martin laughs. No doubt we are busy on that date. No doubt, Alice says. Alice turns as Martin holds out a yellow envelope. What is that? A telegram for you. Martin hands it to her, still smiling as she slips her finger under the flap, pulls out the yellow page and unfolds it. He watches as she goes completely silent. He stood in the entrance to the tent, his back to the dry wind. He squeezed his eyes as he peered into the dark interior. I was crouching in the far corner of the octagonal space, my white skirts fluttering against the green and red of the unfolded carpets, like the flag of a surrendering army. Although the tent had been standing for 24 hours, the air was thick with the fragrance of juniper branches laid down beneath the carpets. From the entrance to my corner was only a few strides. I knew once his eyes adjusted to the light, he would see that the blankets and pouches had been strewn about, and a line of defense had been set up with the large seating pillows. Behind him, the tent flaps inhaled and exhaled slowly, like a tense beast. The man sat down in the shadows of the tent and stared at me. He was nothing but a pair of eyes, fabric, yards and yards of fabric, and a pair of eyes. The eyes were blue, stone blue. The longer he stared at me, the darker they became. He did not seem to blink, nor did he seem to breathe. He was a heap of cloth with a pair of eyes above. The fabric didn't move, not a rustle. It was so still in the tent and warm. I dared not blink. He was too quiet. He was waiting for something. He was waiting for me. It was so warm in there. My feet ached. My body was heavy. We had been walking for so long before the driver met this man. I dared not blink. He was still staring. Now his eyes were black, black sparkles beneath the turban, black sparkles above the blue cloth. I dared not blink. I dared not move. I must be as still as he was. Hours seemed to pass. He got up and left the tent. I collapsed into sleep. Alice, are you all right? Martin is standing at the door staring at me. I lift my head and listen to the words leaving my mouth. Yes, yes, I am all right, I say, as he crosses the carpet towards me. What is this, he says, pointing to the telegram. It is not for you, I say, and see the alarm in his eyes. It is not for you, I repeat, and then fold the paper into my lap. You have no color and your hands are trembling. He pulls out the chair beside me and lowers himself into it, then puts his warm hand over mine and softens his voice. What is the news? Abu has died in the desert. Who is Abu? My lover, I say, surprising myself as much as him. So that is the opening of the book, and we move from there into Alice's memories of the desert and go back and forth between her memories and how she's dealing with it now that the news needs to be told to her family. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. It's such a strong start, Celia. I just particularly, besides just the plot itself, which is gripping, I loved the historical perspective and on the socioeconomic and the cultural changes through the 60 years over the two major, the periods, two major, I guess, the world wars that were, that all these, there was so much turbulence, and this is actually a commentary on that as well. There was, and on top of that, you have your themes of freedom. We have Alice, who found freedom in the most unlikely of places, whereas Abu, who was immersed in this society, wasn't free to choose. So there's a little bit of an irony there, right?
Yes. Yes, I was fascinated by I've always been fascinated by La Belle Époque, the time period before World War I, and the fact that she was in the desert all throughout that war. She came back just at the end of that war, and she came back to a world which was completely turned upside down from the world she had grown up in, and a world that she knew she could never, well, she decided she could never reveal her life in the desert until
Right.
she had to. And the time period of it between beginning of World War I and then in the 70s, which was another major change culturally within, was Carnaby Street, and all sorts of things were happening in Britain. And unfortunately, it was that was the time period when the Tuareg way of life was the way they used to live. It was coming to an end because there had been so many boundaries and states put up within the Sahara Desert. So nomads could not traverse anymore.
Yeah. So this is actually, it's actually also a chronicle of a disappearing culture, isn't it? Because we'll get to that at the end, how the Tuareg have lost, their lifestyle, their livelihoods, and they're becoming increasingly marginalized. But just to go back to the these are some of the darlings from the book that I loved. And just to go back to that beautiful line about freedom, about Alice, and you say, or you write about Alice is thinking this, she says, at times I forgot the differences between myself and the others, no longer male or female, British or Tuareg. No boundaries of class, culture, geography intruded in the space that surrounded us. So I found that so contemporary, as well as something that she could, she could get into at that almost 100 years ago, right? So that was beautiful. I also like the capture of freedom in the desert. You often think, okay, people think of the desert as a kind of a hostile environment, but somehow when you are cut off from your Wi-Fi and your telephones and all of that, and it's a complete kind of transport, complete kind of teleport into another world, and that in itself is freedom. So that was something that I personally experienced when I was on a motorbike this past summer. I was on a motorbike with my husband, and we were doing the Cabot Trail, and then we went up into the Gaspé. And I think I kind of sensed that was my camel, but that I could imagine when Alice was talking about being on that camel and looking up and just seeing the sky, which you don't, right? You're on a highway, you always have something over your head, unless you're in a convertible, but even so, but you look up and you see the sky and you just feel the sense of freedom. So I think that's what stays with me with this book, just that feeling that there's freedom all around. And yet that desert is a character, isn't it? It really is. There's freedom, it's sustaining, and yet it's unforgiving. So things happen in the desert. So did you start out writing this from the viewpoint of the desert as a character?
I think that I started out with the voice of Alice. That's what came first. And I knew it was an older woman looking back on her life. And I know it sounds really odd, but I didn't know what the story would be. I just knew this voice, and, writers have voices in their heads. And so every once in a while, this voice would keep coming back to me. And I think I've shared with you that at one point I was writing in a workshop, and another woman in the workshop is French. And when we read our pieces, and she said to me, "Oh, you're writing about the blue men." And I said, "Who are the blue men?" And she said, "The Tuareg." And then I started researching, and I was absolutely fascinated. And here's this landmass larger than the continental United States that's totally hostile to human habitation, or has been. And here are these people who have learned to live in harmony with it. And then beyond that, they're a matriarchy. And then I was fascinated by that. And so I just did so much research. And when I was looking at the slideshow before we began, the photos that you put up, that's what I remember really hooked me, was the color. I mean, when you think desert, you think, a blank landscape. There is just the most amazing saturated color. And they've taken advantage of it with the way they dress and all. And you're right, anything can happen in the desert. But my experience when I went to do research, and I spent 5 days in the Sahara, as you say, when you take away all the things that are between us and the real world, the natural world, no cell phones, not even roads in the Sahara, you come back to who we really are on this earth. And people, people behave in good, bad, indifferent, but people accept each other in a very different way. And that's what kept me going with the story. I was just fascinated with these people.
Right. That whole, and your ability to just immerse the reader into this world with your words is wonderful. And I was mostly reading late at night, and it was darkness all around me, and I can tell you that I was just living and breathing the colors as well. So just being in that environment, it was great. So the other thing was that it's quite you've got a span of 60 years here, and then it's a switch between her present, and there's 3 points of view here, so I won't give too much away, but basically it's the narrator, who's Alice, and then her husband Martin, who we've already met through your reading, and then there's Edith as well, who is her sister, who is kind of the observer almost. It's done very well, I must say. It was quite seamless, but I'm sure it was very difficult to write. So how did you tackle that? Did you have like this giant, some writers have like these giant pin boards, and they plot everything out in this scene into that. Are you a plotter or a pantser, first of all, for the writers?
No, I'm not a plotter. I don't know what the story is until I get there. So I'm really following the characters around. So this book took many years to write. I sometimes refer to it as a rather difficult long-term relationship. I put it away a few times, a couple of years here, a couple of years there, but Alice wouldn't leave me alone. So it turned out being 3 points of view because I began as a first-person story, and that is so limiting. And also she began to seem like an unreliable narrator. I mean, nobody was believing these crazy stories of the desert. So when I was able to develop the character of Martin, excuse me, then the story came together, and I was able to really tell the story from from her interactions with her sister, from her own interior monologue of her memories, and then from Martin, who was doing his own, investigation, so to speak, to see what she had been talking about. And as far as plotting it out, when I had the first draft or the second draft or the third draft, then I had a writing residency I was awarded, which was wonderful because I spread out all of the pages. And then I was literally like a jigsaw puzzle putting them together. So thank you for saying it worked.
Yeah, and I do have a follow-up question on that is, what was it? I know you fell into this culture of the Tuareg quite by accident, by the French woman making that comment. But what was it about Alice that you said that she wouldn't leave you alone? What was the thing? I mean, what were you at the very beginning, at the inception of the character of Alice? What was it? Was it the fact that she was living in a very corseted society, as you said? Were you looking for the feminist angle here? What was it that stayed with you? Like, why did Alice grip you?
If I go back to the very first line that I wrote, which was actually in response to a writing prompt, I was looking at a George O'Keeffe painting. So I was probably in a desert. And that the very first line was, "I'm 1,000 miles from home." So it was somebody speaking to me. And then you go through all these iterations and revisions, and I thought that line was long gone. And when I was doing one of the final proofs with the publisher, there was that line in the middle of the book. So it was still there. What gripped me about her was the force of her will, that somebody who could survive and could survive trauma. And then it was sort of watching, how did she survive all of that she did? And the fact that she was an artist, I think, was what saved her. She was able to work through things and present things. And she made some really, really horrendous choices. I mean, I had to face parts of all of us have to face within ourselves, the violence that's within us. I had to let my characters be who they were.
Yes, particularly Abu, who is quite a flawed character, isn't he? But there's a dichotomy there. So that's what makes them very real. And also, I think initially we kind of take Alice as a very reliable narrator, and then as the book progresses, you find that, as you were saying, that she's an unreliable narrator. So then very skillfully you bring in Martin. So I really admired that. Going on, you're writing about a whole different culture. What I found fascinating also was that the book reads as if you've had a lifelong fascination with the Tuareg. There's so many little details there, like that would tell somebody or would signify to somebody that you've been immersed in this society. For example, you said, "I watched for weeks," this is coming from Alice, "before I understood that he was training the boy," and he is Abu, "like a shepherd with his dog. He put the boy through the paces of finding his way through the caravan. A nod of the head, the turn of a shoulder could separate one camel from another." And right after that, there was something that Alice was looking at, and she said, and she thought, the pecking order has changed. These are very primal thoughts that go through when you're fighting for your life in the desert, or you're fighting for your status within this community. And yet it reads very seamlessly. So it came as quite a surprise, really, that you came to this quite kind of in a serendipitous way, and that's even more fascinating, that you were able to infuse so much into this book. So did you have any questions, or were you asked questions? Now we're all very culturally appropriate, we have to kind of follow these rules when you're writing about another culture. How have you dealt with that whole issue?
I was warned when I was, agents and publishers were a little uncomfortable that I'm writing about a culture that I'm not part of. And yet I have gotten none of that from readers. And my response is, I mean, I wasn't writing from the point of view of a Tuareg, and I certainly didn't live in 1910. So all that I'm writing from is research. But I also believe that, you know, I'll quote a Nigerian poet, Ben Okri, literature doesn't have a country. Shakespeare is an African writer. The characters of Turgenev are ghetto dwellers. Dickens' characters are Nigerians. Literature may come from a specific place, but it always lives in its own kingdom. And I'll also quote Toni Morrison, who says, we don't write out of what we know, we write of what we wonder and what we want to learn. So that I hope that what came across is a deep respect for this culture and fascination with them. And I'll say that my response to the current zeitgeist of not writing outside your culture is, I'm probably one of the few novels that has a bibliography. I just felt I had to let people know there are places to go to find this information, and that I was steeped in it for years.
Yeah, and it shows that you've done your work really well. Because we have we're most of my audience actually is very interested in textiles, and of course the Tuareg are known as the blue men, or the blue people of the desert, I should say, because the robes, they wore the indigo robes, similar to what you're wearing, I guess, in your scarf. And they would dye these robes, or sorry, they traded blocks of salt in exchange for indigo clothing. And how did that come about? Can you tell us a little bit more about why they wore blue? Why was that something that was an adopted kind of cultural trait, or how, why blue in the desert?
I'm not sure. I did not come across anything that knew exactly when they adopted it, but there definitely was a belief that the dye from the indigo would really help the skin. And that, and certainly when you go on your tour and you get to the Sahara, you want to be completely covered. Yes. Because when the wind comes up and the grit and the blue, of course, I was surprised, I think, that how dark the colors were, that people wore in the desert. You'd think you would want reflecting colors, but they were, I have a little in my slideshow I'll show at the end, that it became it's a rite of passage for men. They get the tagelmus when they come of age. Just like, in old England, you'd get out of your knee pants and into long pants. And then the better the dye, the more iridescent the covering, that was, you were wealthier, you were of a higher nobility, if you were able to have that color.
Right. So I read something about how it being the desert and having some of the nomadic peoples, if they wore white, that signified wealth and status, and so everybody wanted to emulate the wealthy, obviously, and so they began, but they couldn't wear pure white. The people were on the move, they were not nobility or aristocracy, and so they began infusing some of their fabrics with a little bit of indigo dye, which was what was available during that time. And then, of course, so this might be another tribal group, but and I don't mean to bother you too much about this question, but I'm just fascinated because on the one hand, the Tuareg are wearing very, very vivid blue indigo dyed, and yet on the other, the lighter the color, it signifies status. So is that something that kind of evolved over time, and they just decided to just wear blue because it made more sense, or it was more practical? And you don't have to answer that question. It's a very textile related question, very anthropological question.
I don't know that I it is fascinating. I don't know that I have an actual response or answer, but things do evolve over. They were always silversmiths and worked in silver, as things evolved, they began turning to gold, and now a lot of their work is in gold.
Right.
But it used to be they thought gold was dangerous, gold was impure, and silver brought blessings and baraka. But these things change as the world has changed.
Yes, yes, no, fascinating. I had a question about the matrilinear society. How would that fit into a Muslim reality? Because of obviously the Tuareg predate Islam when before it came, the Arabs came and they brought Islam to this society. But having a matrilinear society into the traditional Muslim or the Islamic version of patriarch, how would that? Do you have any concept, or is
Well,
this something like one of these syncretic religions that they practice?
it is. The Tuaregs actually, I hope I have this right, that the name comes from being Tuaregs were the unconverted. So even though they seemed to convert, the Tuaregs still did their own way of life. And the matrilineal society was so excited when my book came out. Somebody connected with me on Instagram, and there is a woman who has done a documentary, which I hope is going to be out in a year or so, on matriarchies. And there are only 4 left in the world.
Yeah.
China, Indonesia, India, and the Tuaregs. And her documentary is she went to each culture, each society, and watched a woman come of age and documented that. So they have managed, despite it all, to maintain that matriarchy inside I think you have to look at it, or I looked at it as, the Muslims and these things are like the winds of the Sahara. They just blow across and they take what they want and they just keep going.
Right.
So
right.
the women, they kept their way of life.
And then you do mention also right in the beginning that they have their own language, but they would talk in Arabic when they were with other people. So, that in itself is very telling point, isn't it, about what they want to absorb of a new whatever religion or set of cultural values or something.
They know how to survive.
Yes, absolutely. I think, yeah, that's what it speaks to. So just to go back a little bit back on the indigo, because I'm sure there's going to be more questions about this. So I would say I asked this question of Celia just a little before when we had a little practice session. And what we had was the indigo, they didn't dye their own clothing. They actually traded their salt blocks, and which they would cart on their camels. And there's photographs of them actually loading these big salt blocks that they got out of the desert, loading their camels with these salt blocks. And then they would trade them for indigo fabric from Egypt. And it would have been...
And also from Niger, the Hausa people. So they had multiple places where they traded for it.
Yeah, and they would, this was pre-war, the book is set pre-war. So I would imagine that this was natural indigo and not synthetic, which is probably what they're using now, because indigo dyeing is so difficult and the dye itself is so putative. And it's very interesting what you mentioned, that they believe that rubbing off the indigo on their skin, it was beneficial for their well-being, particularly in the desert. So all of those questions surrounding indigo, to the audience, if you have any more questions about the indigo, we'd love to take a crack at them. Not that we'll be able to answer them, but certainly, it'll be interesting to go down that route. Now, the other question I had was that veils on men and veils on women in society have different connotations, even though in this society, the men were veiled, but the men were veiled because they were out on the caravans and they were out, fighting the desert storms and so on. And the women were not veiled. I mean, yes, for women not to be veiled, it's definitely a sign of a matrilinear, matriarchal society. But for the men to be veiled, that didn't have any connotations like how, women being veiled would have, right? Celia, am I reading that
So
right?
that's a really intriguing question because men remained veiled even off the caravan.
Oh.
And it was a sign of disrespect where it's sort of like today when I see people wearing masks and some of them have them hanging down and some don't cover the, that's disrespectful.
Mm.
They only unveiled themselves among their own. So it was kind of a way of speaking and interacting with people. When you saw where the veil was, you knew where you stood and you knew how things were going. So it was something that they used as other than just for shelter and care.
Very, very interesting that it could also signify how much respect you're offering. Almost like the Japanese bow, isn't it? How deep you bow. Maybe the veil, how much it comes up, also signifies that. No, that's great. I was also wondering about the position of Abu in the tribe. He seems like a young guy, or at least I want to imagine him as this virile, young guy, right? Younger guy. And what age do you think he was? And for the purposes of the book, he seems younger, but in reality, would a more senior person be the head of the caravan or head of a tribal group like that?
I was not specific about his age, but I think you're right. He would have been older. So it's one more problem, an older man, younger woman, but not all that much older, but old enough that, he passes before she does and she gets this news. Yes, he would have been, I would say, maybe in his 30s or something. I'm just making that up.
Right.
I made up everything else.
No, fascinating. So because we've got, I know you managed to pick up some beautiful pieces, the Tuareg pieces, the silver pieces. Why don't we start looking at some of those and we can start, I can see you're wearing something that's so beautiful. It's a Tuareg cross, is it?
This is the Tuareg cross, which I will show. So shall I share my screen?
Yes, please do. Please do.
Okay. So this is the pouch that a Tuareg man would carry. And this one is a used pouch. And just as I sort of fell into the story when someone told me who the Tuareg were, before I began really writing this, I came across this in a shop in Boston, which is where I'm from the East Coast. And I just had a visceral reaction to it. I just had to have it. I didn't know what it was. It kind of scared me, but I bought it. And then as I kept writing and moving along with my story, I've sort of learned what it is. So this would be worn under the clothing, and it would be something that a man wore 24/7. And he kept his most important items and things in there. And there's something he kept in there, not to spoil in the book, but something to do with Alice. So it comes apart by sliding up and down like this. This doesn't show very well, but this has Tamashek print in it. So whatever this person had in there, he'd written. And then there's another inner little thing to hold things. And this is all hand-tooled leather work that's done by the women in the camps. This is a pendant, and the silver has these triangle-like things are tents, and then the undulating ones are the dunes. Oh. And you'll see this on a lot of their jewelry. This is how the designs that they use.
Beautiful.
This is what I'm wearing. This is the Tuareg cross, which has become ubiquitous now. When you go to Morocco, you're going to see it everywhere. And they used to have an idea that the cross, you pointed to all four corners of the earth because you never knew where you would die. So you kept this as an amulet for that. This, I don't really think this is Tuareg. I think this is more Berber, but it's another one of their medallions, and I liked it, so I had fun.
Does it open up at all, Celia? I mean, the top part where you have the little rectangular piece, it doesn't open up?
It doesn't, and I probably should have taken a photo of the back because the back is silver and it almost looked like it had teeth marks on it. And I thought, oh, was this, somebody's child was teething on? So I should take a photo of the back.
Because silver is quite soft that way, isn't it? It's more malleable than, I mean, gold is more, but normally they put another metal in gold to make it harder. And I have a piece like that, actually. It's interesting. I have one that where I think I was told that it belonged to a Nepali princess, and it has a little, where you have the rectangular thing on the top that kind of opens up. It's a little vial, and then you apparently you could stuff that with perfume or even poison if you needed to take poison, because apparently this.
Okay, I'm going to go take a closer look at this. And see if there's
maybe there is a secret way to open it. I'd be very interested to find that out. Yeah, please carry on.
I will check that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a smaller, you will find these now. This is a touristy one. This is a smaller pouch, but I love the turquoise in it. And this clearly hasn't been used. The pouch that I showed you earlier has a fragrance. It's clearly been used. Somebody owned it for a long time and wore it.
And these are all made out of leather? Those were made out of leather?
These are all leathers that's dyed and cut, yes. And this, I would sort of tested you if people can tell what this is. It's not the best photo, but this is a sea urchin covered in Sahara sand that I picked up just in the Sahara, which is another one of those, oh my gosh, we're living, this used to be an ocean. You really get a sense of how big we are on the earth. We're really just a little. We're
just in the space of time. I remember when we go into the desert on our tour, we go into so from Marrakesh, where we go into the desert, there's a cafe. It's called Cafe Tisardamin, and this is run by a British Australian woman who, like Alice, modern day Alice, she disappeared. She took off into the desert and just disappeared. Nobody knew where she was. And so we go and meet with her, and we sit with the Amazigh or the Beber people, and they're weaving. And so that particular spot where this woman has set up this camp, it's full of fossils, and they've used these fossils to actually make the sign for the cafe. It's called Cafe Tisardamin, and it's like you're just gonna go like, what? This was all under the ocean for millions of years. And these fossils are there. So fascinating. Please, do carry on.
And this is just to show you. This would be a noble person or somebody of high rank, because his shesh, his tagelmust, is so iridescent. So the more iridescent the color, and also his pouch would be under here somewhere, and then always carrying his sword. And this is a wonderful book if people really want to follow up. This is from an exhibit that was Tuareg art at UCLA about 5 or 6 years ago. I've used this for lots of research. So
fascinating.
Sharing now.
Fascinating.
Thank you.
A question about the Tuareg robe that is iridescent. So would they have used any kind of a combination? I don't know, like a synthetic or silk, or I don't know, what gives it that hue? You think the base?
I'm not sure.
Synthetic, it's not going to take on the dye, right? Yeah. But
you would know that better than I.
Yeah, I wonder.
This, of course, is a contemporary photo.
Maybe the cotton or whatever they use is linen, if it is linen, but if it's cotton, then they might use like a longer staple, or they might buff it a little to get that glow. So I'd be very interested to find out.
Well, you have some research to do on this.
I have research to do, yes, before we get to Morocco in March. So we have, let's see now, we're about 15 minutes more, and I think what we can do is we can take some questions now, and then we'll wrap it up with another short reading from the book. And so why don't we take the questions? We have some questions where Mary wrote in and said, what is the significance of the gold earrings being sent to Alice? I have read that they are taboo for Tuareg women to wear gold. And what was Lila's role in the tribe? And why did Alice's son say Lila was not honorable? So a few questions there, if people have read the book, but these are all these lovely details that that make this book come alive.
I think that, you know, sometimes when you're writing, you're just kind of in altered consciousness or whatever, so you're picking things out. And it was very much to show that Lila was an outlier almost. I mean, because at that time, women wouldn't wear, the gold was there, but it wasn't what they wore. And someone to wear that, now they do, but it was, she was definitely apart from the tribe and not honorable. And that was sort of a way to show that she would do things that were not acceptable. Okay. Including what she did to Alice, but we'll leave that.
Right. So yeah, it was fascinating. And I think at one point she does send those earrings to England, but I don't know. I don't want this to be a spoiler for people who, and we definitely want people to get this book. So Carla asks, is this book based on a true story? And I think you've answered that, right? So it's very much
it's not, it's fiction, but there is a woman, Isabel Eberhardt, who wrote The Oblivion Seekers and a couple of other books, and she went into the desert. She was a Swiss woman, and she went into the desert in around the same time, maybe in 1920s, and dressed herself as a man and lived in the desert and wrote these amazing books. So I sort of, it's not her story, but the idea of a woman being accepted into a tribe or finding her way in the desert sort of came from reading those. It's totally fiction, but I think any writer, there's emotional truth that they bring to their story. And I think that I did that.
Yeah, no, definitely. So Mary also asks, what are your experiences in interacting with the Tuareg? You did research when you went into the desert.
I did research. I was able to talk with one through that I had a reference librarian that helped me connect with at a university. But I was writing, as I say, about a period of time that doesn't exist anymore. So I really was not able to see the Tuaregs in that world that I was writing about. So this is mostly based on my research and a couple of people I was able to talk with.
They're a bit difficult to access, aren't they? Okay, carry on.
Yeah, somebody asked, who is the Swiss writer who wrote the book? Isabel Eberhardt, E.B. I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah. That'd be great. Thank you. And so Gilda says, I visited Mali many years ago and I was told that the indigo plant in the Sahara produces a unique blue color that is far more intense than any other indigo in the world. And oh, that's fascinating. And that would be true because, you know, indigo is, it grows in hot, it does really well in hot climate. So, you know, the Sahara definitely in it. So it's, you know, definitely a plant that thrives in hot and dry, arid conditions. So that's interesting.
And
more, you know,
are in, and the Hausa, Hausa, are people from Mali and Niger. So that was the area they traded in. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. These, you know, this is what I love about these events, because we have some very knowledgeable people, as you can see, and we're piecing all this knowledge. It's like, you know, putting together a jigsaw puzzle. So thank you, you know, everybody for chiming in. This is fascinating. Britt says there are many fossils in the desert, and yes, I agree. And Barbara says in northern Nigeria, the fabric is pounded to give it a sheen, and that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so we've answered the question about the Swiss writer's name who wrote the book. And I think if there's no more questions, then we can keep on talking about the Tuareg. I know I have like so many, I have 1,000 questions, but I need to go and do my reading first. I did read a fascinating article in National Geographic about what's happening to the Tuareg now. So do you want to touch upon that a little bit, Celia, before we wrap up?
It's an unfortunate situation. As I said, they're the land that they would crisscross, they've crossed the entire Sahara, and it's now divided up into countries and borders. And they were warriors. That's how they maintained their trade routes. So two things happened. The French started colonizing very heavily, and their trade routes had large watering holes. And they would move, so they'd be at one hole, and then months later they'd be at another. And when the French started just opening them up, they dried up the holes. So they've had years of drought. They haven't been able to maintain their trade routes. And that whole area of the world is now being infiltrated by Al-Qaeda and others. And just this week, we've heard about a coup in Burkina Faso. So it's a very, very troubled area of the world, and they are caught in the middle of that. The two things that they've managed to do are their silver, their jewelry is getting out in the world, and their music. And until the COVID and everything, there used to be a music festival in Mali. I think it was in Mali, and a lot of it was Tuareg music. And at one point, after the French were making up for all their colonization or whatever, and they made a national park in Al-Hagar, which is the center of the Sahara. And the Tuaregs were to run this park, but nobody can go now, and nobody can even get there through these trade routes. So they're stuck there too. So it's been unfortunate what's been happening.
It's a common story, isn't it? It's it's happening everywhere, and it's so distressing that their way of life that has gone on uninterrupted for millennia is disappearing. Yeah. We have one more question from Jennifer. How many Tuareg are there or were there? Any idea?
Oh, that's a good question, because there are many different tribes, and so I don't have an answer for that.
That's another one that we'll table for. And we will get back with some of these questions that we don't have answers for. We'll kind of research, and we'll include some links as a follow-up in the next few days. So just look out for that. Kathy tells us that Jenny Balfour-Paul, and she is an authority on indigo, her dissertation, Indigo in the Arab World, includes a section on the Tuareg that provides a lot of good information. Yes, I can vouch for anything that Jenny Balfour-Paul has written. She's absolutely wonderful with indigo, and yes, of course, she would know about the Tuareg. And who was a Nigerian writer that you quoted? That was lovely. You quoted something about Shakespeare being African.
Oh, that was Ben Okri, O-K-R-I.
Yeah.
He's a Nigerian poet. He won the Booker Prize. Yeah.
Right. Yes. Of course. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I in a world that is increasingly drawn up and cut up and quartered, and this corner belongs to you and that belongs, and I think literature, as you say, should belong to everybody, as long as you're respectful, obviously, and it should not have boundaries. It's how are we going to get through this, all the changes that are coming at us, if we feel that we cannot freely write about another culture respectfully, again, and always keeping in mind that you're not stealing from another culture, and I speak as somebody who has Indian ancestry. I grew up in Kenya and so on. So I think we'd lose something of the human experience if we didn't have that. So how do you feel? I think you'd agree with that, right, Celia?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see now. We'll get Celia to read a little bit more to just see us out of this book talk, and then I have requests for the slideshow that was playing when people first came in, to play again at the end. So if you'd like to see the slideshow, I can put it up, and we'll have Celia read a short, like 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll put that slideshow back on. All right, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I read from the opening, which was 1910 England, in Devon before they left. And so now I'm going to read a very short piece from when they arrived in Morocco. And Alice at this point is 16 years old. And she writes, she says, "Our first weeks in Morocco, I could hardly breathe. The air was hot and dry, cold and wet, all at the same time. I knew the moist salt air of the seaside, the acid cold stink air of the city, and the gentle clear air of the country. But this was something my lungs couldn't fathom. Each breath brought in a different atmosphere. It was as if there were no barriers, east or west, to the wind. It came across the Sahara, dragging the fertile earth of the east up and over the mountains of stone ground down for longer than man had lived, and swept down the coast to curve inland and startle us with the salt of an ocean open all the way to the other side of the earth. Edith and I spent much of our days in the garden as we could. The two of us left off our corsets and walked barefoot most days. The warmth, the fragrance, the light, it entranced us. We're becoming natives, Edith laughed. We live in an inside-out world, I said. The walls and windows and doors, but the house was open to light and air in ways no building in England ever was. The smell of roses and lemons and oleander followed us inside when we were called to continue our studies. When the library shipped from home, we dutifully opened our Latin, but always aware of the tantalizing garden outside the window. The kitchen is the place to learn the ways of the world. In Devon, Kate kept life humming between the long wooden table and the pantry. There was always something simmering on the stove, a cup of tea at the ready, stories to tell, a smile at the sight of me. Here, the kitchen was an open courtyard, the work table a spot on the ground. Courtyard was always full of women and men coming and going, delivering vegetables, chasing chickens, slicing, dicing, poking the fire, and chattering away. The first time I stepped into the kitchen courtyard, everything went silent. Alif stood, bowed deeply, and stared at me. "Assalamu alaikum," he said. I bowed and smiled back at him as the women twittered, trying to hide their laughter, turning their faces away. The color and fragrance stunned me. It was everywhere. Oranges, lemons, greens, mingled with the burnt umber of small piles of spices. I stood mute, looking around at the hands chopping and mixing, until I realized all activity had ceased. Alif was standing silently. I involuntarily shook myself as I realized he must be waiting for orders, or perhaps for me to leave. "Oh," I said, and pointed at a pomegranate. He handed it to me. I bowed and turned to leave. As I passed through the doorway, a buzz arose, and the chopping, mixing, sweeping, and chattering once again filled the courtyard. I continued to visit the kitchen now and then, despite Mother's disapproval. "Alice, please try to conduct yourself properly. These people are not our kind. Do not interfere." Edith just shook her head each time I headed to the courtyard. Finally, my presence no longer discomfited people, and Mother decided my visits were useful. I could teach Alif how to make proper tea. I knew that was never going to happen, but why tell her? Thick, syrupy mint tea continued to appear at the table until she gave up and sent me in to commandeer a pot of water to make her Fortnum and Mason. A day later, Alif presented me with a battered old teapot and a space by the fire. Making tea with Alif became my passport to a new world of herbs and spices, sounds and smells, to a more sensory world than I ever could have dreamed possible. So, Alice is in Morocco.
Thank you. And yeah, it was
Huge.
slice of being in Morocco. Okay, well, I think we can wrap it up. And we have, Mary makes one last comment. She says, She says, I love the masher hung as an effigy and the cook who bowed to it, that we should be also respectful to the beliefs of others. I think, yeah, that is a great note on which to end. And yeah, the imagery delivered, this is what makes makes Morocco such a wonderful destination. I am now going to just share my screen because we have a few requests about the slideshow, and please feel free to stay on or leave as we want. Thank you so much for joining us. Just a quick note about next ones coming up. We have Dr. Robert De Caroli. He's coming up again with the Silk Roads on February the 10th. He's going to talk about that. The link is up on the website, so please do go ahead and register for that. Our next book event is going to be with Chloe Sayer, who is going to take us to Mexico and the Day of the Dead in Mexico. So please do, you'll see that coming through. And as usual, we will keep bringing lots of events to keep that travel sparkle, twinkle alive in your eyes. So thank you so much for joining us. So here's a slideshow, and thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Yes, thank you, Celia. That was wonderful.
And one safe travels to everyone. I'm so jealous that you're going back there.
Well, you're going to come with us next time, and actually
next time, definitely.
Celia, we're going to have you actually lead a tour into the Tuareg area. So why don't we think about that? I'm always thinking of new ways to discover these traditional societies. So we would love to. And here's the link if you wanted to check out Celia's website. We put a link up on chat as well in case you wanted to check out our tour. Yes, it is happening. We are going. So please do keep that in mind. All right. Okay. So here's a slideshow again, and you have a wonderful day wherever you are. All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Celia. Bye-bye.